Hello and welcome to The Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. Whereas prisons, of course, we all understand, is used as a tool to actually curb crime by confining violent and persistent offenders, it also has that potential to harden criminals at the same time, in turn, kind of increasing the risk to reoffend. Having said that, we'll today be talking about the status, the conditions of prison systems, of prisons, so to speak, as they do stand in the Pakistani society today. More so, we'll be talking about the challenges which come forward, especially when it comes to treating the mentally ill offenders, when it comes to actually sentencing women offenders, when it comes to giving out sentences for juvenile offenders, these all being the downtrodden segments of the Pakistani society. And in this regard, we'll also be touching upon this exemplary judgment which came from the Supreme Court of Pakistan recently, which very categorically stated that death penalty now will not be given to anybody who suffers from a mental ailment. What kind of implications will this judgment now have? To what extent will it actually be possible to implement it? And having said that, how can we all as a responsible society work towards rehabilitation of prisoners in our society? This and much more we'll be talking about in our today's show. And to do that, I have an extremely distinguished panel with me here today. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Barrister Sara Bilal, who is a legal expert alongside being the Executive Director of Justice Project Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
You're most welcome. My second panelist for the show today is Osama Khawar, who is an analyst and a social activist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Welcome.
My third panelist for the show today is Ms. Manal Tahir, who is an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here today.
You're most welcome. And via Zoom, we'll be joined by Ms. Wajiha Komal, who is a correctional psychologist. Assalamu alaikum Wajiha, and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you.
You're most welcome. So I'll start the conversation with you. There was this report in US which suggested that the most disadvantaged part of the prison population US is that which is actually poor and also belongs to the minority. So when you make a comparison of that to Pakistan, how do you feel does that apply to Pakistan?
100%. All over the world, prisons and the criminal justice system is much harder to navigate if you are born poor. You have much less resources through which you can actually defend yourself through the criminal justice system. And again, if you're disadvantaged in any way, whether it's economically, mentally, psychosocially, or you're a juvenile or a female, the chances of you getting sentenced harsher are higher with the less resources that you have. So it absolutely applies to Pakistan as well, like it does everywhere in the world.
Right. Sara, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Osama Saab. I understand the fact that, you recently filed this petition in the Lahore High Court, and part of which is, of course, to improve access to justice system for those who can't access it. So tell us more about this petition, that, what all is it about, and why do you feel is it so important for us to actually improve the access of, the justice system more so to the vulnerable segments of the Pakistani society?
So I think what Sara pointed out, and you also in your question also raised this issue. So this disproportionately, the system, criminal justice system, and especially prisons, they disproportionately impact and adversely impact the poorer and segments of society, especially women and also minorities.
Right.
But the other problem, the more fundamental problem, it is this, that there are laws and there are institutions that exist on paper. So for example, at district level, there are committees headed by the session judges, which are supposed to provide legal aid. Similarly, there are certain authorities. But the problem is that in practice, there is no actual work on ground.
Right.
So that is where the civil society and especially the political leadership, as long if there is no political ownership of these issues, then it becomes a problem.
Right, Osama, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Manal. I think we must also talk about this from an educationist point of view, which is why we have you today on the panel. So tell me that, when we talk about educating people, when we talk about educating prisoners, so to speak, with regards to today's topic, why do you feel is it very important for us to educate them at least in a basic level, more so, when they are under trial, they are, serving a sentence, and even if we can't for that matter educate them, at least inculcate this basic level of vocational training into them so that their time isn't wasted at least?
Of course, I absolutely agree on that giving them education is much essential and it's their rights according to the Human Rights United Nations, clause number 6. It's clearly mentioned that cultural values, festivities, and also right to education for all the prisoners is compulsory. So here I'd like to add that giving them the much awareness of education about happenings, about knowing about something, about skills development or grooming, it builds up their self-esteem, and yet it brings in a good cultural development amongst the staff members of the prison itself, so it's a healthy environment given in between.
Right. Sarah, I think you would want to add something to this from a practical viewpoint.
Yeah.
Like, to what extent are they actually given this kind of a non-formal education?
So they are actually. I can speak in much more detail or with much more confidence about Sindh and Punjab, which is where most of our work is concentrated. But it reminded me of a client that I had, the very first actually client that I ever had on death row, and it's the reason that I started doing the work that I do. And his name was Zulfikar Ali Khan, and he had spent his entire time on death row actually completing not only his BA but his master's.
Amazing.
And then he did over 32 degrees and diplomas. But then over his time on death row, he spent over 16 years on death row, he educated 600 prisoners. He was in a Diyala prison, and he became known as the teacher. So he was educating all these other prisoners who would come to prison that were younger, weren't on death row, but and when the state was going to hang him finally in 2015, all of these prisoners, we tracked down a lot of those prisoners, and they all wrote hundreds of letters to the president saying, this man saved our life. We would have been lost in prison. This man gave us hope.
Right, Sarah, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Wajia. I think you have a very interesting narrative to offer to today's show, considering that you're a correctional psychologist yourself. So tell us that, what all comes within the scope of your job, and when it comes to, actually practically, counseling all the people who come to you, more so, people in the prison. How does this actually work out, both from the perspective of, evaluating their mental health, as well as from, helping them rehabilitate back in the society?
First of all, I'm glad that finally we are talking about this. Right. Secondly, being a correctional psychologist, most of the people don't even know what correctional psychologist is. Correctional psychologist, you can also call it as prison psychologist. Basically, it is a new field in Pakistan, and I am I am one of the few psychologists in Pakistan who are considered the pioneer batch of prison psychologist or correctional psychologist Pakistan. So correctional psychology, the main purpose is to rehabilitate the prisoners, the ones who are inside, who are confined for a long time, do develop mental health issues. So how does it work? Starting from, firstly, we need to know what is the process, what is the procedure for every jail. On daily basis, new inmates are being admitted in every jail. So they are being assessed for their psychological issues, and also for their they are also being assessed for their medical issues by the medical officer. So psychologist has to do initial psychological assessment or screening to screen out the ones who are having any kind of psychological issues, any suicidal thoughts, any risk behavior, anything either they can provide harm to themselves inside the prison later on.
Right, Ms. Wajia. Just one thing I would want you to clarify for the benefit of the audience, that when you say that it is a psychologist's responsibility to actually do this, is there a medical board which actually sit, or is it that just one particular psychologist's determination which will actually decide, whether somebody has a mental illness or not?
As it is a daily practice, so there is no medical board as such. We have medical officers inside every jail, and we have psychologists and then junior psychologists. The team is about junior psychologists, and then we have correctional staff. They are actually the uniform force, part of the uniform force, but they are being trained to work with correctional psychologists. So this is the team. There is no as such medical board. We do medical board and all of these things are required at the later stage when a prisoner is going through some medical or psychological issue, and that is neglected or not considered.
Right, Vijaya, your point is noted. On which you wanted to add something?
I think what Vijaya is speaking about is the initial screening,
right,
which has to be done by the prison when a prisoner is entering. So that's a jail function. That's a daily function. I think in Punjab there's an average turnover rate of 500 prisoners a day that are coming in and coming out of the various Punjab jails. So that the screening is that's the initial intake screening that they do on every prisoner. For risk assessment and other stuff. For the medical boards, that's more to do with, during trial. Is the prisoner competent to stand trial? So medical boards are usually based on court orders that are given to either determine a prisoner's competency or his sentence or his need to be shifted to a jail if there's a much more serious issue or a prolonged or persistent issue.
Right.
And I also just want to very quickly say that this initiative that Vijaya is a part of is actually a very, very important and long overdue initiative by the state. There's 43 jails in Punjab alone, and over 50,000 prisoners in just Punjab alone. And this was a very, very dire need in order to, actually provide the mental health support.
Right.
So it's a new initiative, relatively new. But it's a good initiative and it's a long overdue one, so we should give credit where credit is.
Of course. So basically, Sara, I would want you to tell us about this, a very landmark judgment on which you were working for quite some time, and you managed to get relief from the Supreme Court of Pakistan, a few months ago, rather last year for that matter, in which the Supreme Court, very categorically stated that, you can't give death penalties now to people who are mentally ill. So how did this all come about? And, I understand this was a long journey all the way to Supreme Court.
Yes, so I mean, first of all, the judgment is a landmark judgment just because it not only just talks about, introduces a prohibition on the death penalty or the execution of prisoners who are severely mentally ill. So it's not, if you're just mentally ill, you can't get the death penalty. It's you have to fulfill a standard, which is a pretty high standard. But it also, the Supreme Court also, it's a very practical judgment, and we call it a reset and a beginning because it reminds everybody, in the criminal justice system. It just upholds all of the safeguards and the protections that were already there in our law. And I think it was a long overdue judgment in the sense that it's been many years since the apex court had actually looked at the matter, revisited the matter in such detail. And it's important when they do that, right? Because it refocuses all of the actors within the criminal justice system on this. But another reason why I love this judgment is because it's really grounded in practicality. So there is a long list of recommendations that the Supreme Court has made to all of the provinces.
Right.
Concrete steps that the provinces must take to really uphold and implement some already existing laws that were in place, such as the Mental Health Acts, right? Which were passed in 2001, which require the provinces, and each province has now their own Mental Health Act. But the structure is the same.
Right.
And those were just ignored and not implemented. So it's a very good practical judgment that way.
Right. And I think in this way, Supreme Court also set the precedent for actually making way for, police, for criminology, for medical science, all coming together to work. And so I think that in itself is a very big, something very heartening to see from the criminal justice system. You've also been working on the issue of torture, more so, torture and, custodial torture as we speak about it within prisons. So when we talk about this, from a larger and a broader perspective, we see that, women are subjected to violence, children, they might be assaulted in prisons, or for that matter, anybody. But one problem I see in the entire system is that unfortunately such cases aren't reported. They happen to be underreported. So how do you feel can we overcome this issue?
I'm glad you have mentioned custodial torture because that is where primarily torture takes place in Pakistan. It is not in the jails that the torture, there's a minor component. So I think there are several aspects to this custodial torture. We need to look at from the perspective of the law enforcement agencies.
Right.
So they are severely understaffed. It is a means for investigation. This is the only mean of investigation that they have known for 150 years. So we need to work on that. We need to equip them with better tools, skills,
improve their investigation methods, and perhaps also improve the complaint mechanism.
But the other aspect is we also need regulatory oversight.
Right.
So right now the problem is if I get tortured in a particular police station, then my remedy under the law is to go to the very same police station and try to get a FIR registered.
Right.
And that SHO and in the present system, they have too much power to implicate me in other cases. So there is a fear of reprisal. So many of clients who come to us and we ask them, okay, why don't you follow through and file an FIR? And they're like, oh, look, we just got out of this lots of mess and we don't want to have anything.
So we need amendments to the law in that way, and also I think there needs to be more will on part of people, especially when it comes to women.
And independent independent oversight, because this can't be a police officer sitting in a particular thana. He can't be a judge and a jury and execution in his own cause, because if I allege that this particular police station has tortured me, then I should not be forced to go to the very police station. So there needs to be some sort of regulatory reform, and there needs to be perhaps a third independent agency or within the police department that in the cases of custodial torture, if there is a complaint, it should be investigated by
an independent
third party, either within the police system or completely separate.
Whatever way they put it, basically.
Human rights.
Right. On which I'll come to you, Manal. I think we must also, address this entire debate from a socio-economic and also from a social angle. Now, when we talk about, of course, commission of crimes, we must also talk about its causes. So, looking at it from an educationist angle, why do you feel that, lack of education could possibly be a contributory factor when it comes to, increased commission of crimes in any society?
To be honest with you, it's education and also the family background as well. And kids in the families, in childhood, they're seeing their family problems, for example, psychologically disturbed marriages, when they're seeing their grown-ups looking at their parents disturbed. Alongside of that, they're seeing financial problems as well. So they won't have the right education in the private sector or maybe any other government school, So not only that, it's the financial issues, the social issues, and all of that all together, adding up to a situation where a child is frustrated psychologically, and then adding up to that frustration, they're going to, adding up to crime, they're thinking of bullying someone, or maybe, that is just adding up one after the other.
So, of course, then we can't just simplistically reduce it to, there not being an education, for that matter, there not being the right education, because I think in today's world, it's just not the formal education that you seek in a classroom, it's also about the non-formal education which children get, which everybody gets. Coming to you, Ms. Vaji, I think we must talk about this from a psychological perspective as well at the end of the day. So, tell us about your experiences, that when you come across such people who commit crimes, and in the course of actually giving them therapy or counseling them for that matter, what are the most common causes do you feel are those because of which people commit crimes?
In my career, I have assessed or treated around 4,000 to 5,000 prisoners. I will tell you that the main reason I found among kids or juveniles, the reason behind committing crime, or I would rather say committing mistakes, is that most of them are neglected children. I have interviewed, assessed a lot of them, and I found that someone has, they are orphans, they don't have parents, some has parents, but they are neglected, they are not taken care of, they are someone, and also with that poverty, lack of financial resources, theft is very common in rural areas. We see that because of the financial constraints, and in the beginning, kids often feel neglected because they don't have those resources to they need a new cell phone, particularly these are the things that juveniles used to tell me, that they need a cell phone, so they just stole money, and they and someone and a lot of juveniles unfortunately are into drug addiction as well, and for that they told me that the reason behind that was mostly that their parents were strict, to them.
Right, your point is noted. But another question I would like to put to you in this regard is, I think, the challenges which people like yourself, come across, especially in the course of treating prisoners. A lot of times we see that, people who do suffer from mental illnesses, they aren't very open about it, probably because of the stigma in the society. So how do you help, such people come out of this stigma, firstly to accept their disease, and secondly to be able to, reach out to people like yourself so as to be able to, get themselves treated?
It's part of our training actually. That firstly we don't just start treating them initially. First 2 or 3 or as much as required sessions are for the rapport building. Firstly, we develop that rapport with the client, with the patient, with the inmate, if say so. Then after that, when that patient, that client starts talking to us, and that patient has that trust on us, which we are trained for, then they start talking about their issues. And one thing that is the basic ethics of psychology as a field, that we have to maintain the confidentiality of whatever they are sharing. So they are ensured that whatever they are sharing, whatever they are telling is between two of us, and we are not going to use that against them. Especially the prisoners have this concern, so we ensure them that it is going to be between us, and we are not going to use that on any platform. And we do maintain that confidentiality, and the data we have of them regarding their treatment plans or their assessment, everything that is confidential.
Right. And it is only used to treat them. Your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Sarah. I think we must also talk about the rights of the more vulnerable people, other than, of course, mentally ill persons in the Pakistani society, the women as we speak, elderly people, sick people who might have physical disabilities, and for that matter, even juvenile offenders. So how do you feel, how, sensitive or how humane is our prison system to all these people?
So I think rather than just single out the Pakistan prison system, I think it's very important for us to recognize that you have hundreds of years of human history.
Right.
And that's essentially data that's before us. And then when you see, for example, juvenile offenders, females, going to prison, I think apart from maybe some countries even within Scandinavia, no one gets it right. If you take, and there are many studies on this, women are much more vulnerable. They're much more prone to trauma when you send them to prison. They have much higher rates of PTSD. You're also disrupting the entire family system, because when you send a woman to prison, you're depriving a child of a mother. So the child hasn't committed any wrong, right? But in essence, their rights as children and their inherent rights are being violated, and you're perpetuating a cycle of violence, right? So by depriving that, so that child is much more likely to then, end up in prison or end up offending, because they end up being neglected. So I think, and then again, old people, I mean, people who are terminally ill, we have them in our prisons.
Right.
What penal purpose are they serving?
Exactly, I was
by
about
having
to
them.
But even for transgenders, we now have separate prisons, don't we?
Well, I mean, so we have separate, for example, there have been policies that have been generated by the prisons department that transgender prisoners will be kept separate. But then the problem again becomes that you might have, for example, 1 or 2, mostly just 1 at a time in prison.
Right.
And they end up being separated and being kept effectively in solitary. And it's not the fault of the prison department. They're trying to protect that person.
Right.
And in a country like Pakistan, where we're strapped of resources, right, we have to have a very practical outlook in terms of policy decisions.
Of course.
So if we look at, for example, 52,000 prisoners in Punjab against an occupancy capacity of under 30,000, and you have over 66% of the prisoners within our prisons all over Pakistan are actually people who have not been convicted of a crime. They're under trial.
So
why are we keeping
all these people?
For example, why are they not being bailed? And I'm not talking about maybe you're facing a very serious crime or you have a history of offending, but why are under trial women, elderly, juveniles not being paroled? And again, that's not just, I think historically, policy-wise, the problem has been that we always focus on the prison department as a way to solve it. And the problem for why we have rampant overcrowding and mostly under trial prisoners.
Sarah has raised some very valid points that, there are so many things, of course, that we need to look at, if you want to generally address all these issues. And I think a large part of which is, of course, the law enforcement agencies too. But I think it would be unfair if we put all the responsibility on the state, on the law enforcement. I think the society also needs to step in this regard. So what are your views on this?
So I think there needs to be mass education for the management of the expectations of the society,
right?
And also what is the proper role of law enforcement agency. So two examples, for example. So first, so lots of times once you talk to these police officials and they express their handicap and they say that the society expects the complainants who comes to us to the police station, they expect that we are the recovering agency for them, for recovery of the property.
Right.
Once you look at the laws and then how the state is structured and how a reasonable working functional criminal justice system, that is not the proper role of the police.
Right.
So society thinks the police is out there to recover the properties, let's say stolen cars, stolen food for them. The second issue, so for example, as Sarah pointed out, so there are more under trial prisoners in Pakistani jails, like 60%, and only 40% prison population consists of people who are actually convicted.
I think this is also another reason why we need to go on rehabilitation.
So what we need to do is to educate the people that look, you cannot put someone behind jail just because he's accused of a certain crime, because until
you're innocent until you're proven guilty.
That's a very fundamental principle of justice,
and that has to be beyond reasonable doubt
for so long.
Right.
So people need to be educated about it, and their expectations need to be managed and perhaps
and maybe
upgraded.
perhaps also be real in that way, on which I'll come to you. I think education, that is the key. That is something that we've been talking about again and again. But the question then arises is that education through what mechanism? Do you not feel that mainstream mass media has a very important role to play here?
Of course it is, because nowadays it's all visual that we are all learning from and gaining knowledge from, to be honest. We have internet, we've got gadgets all around us. We are tech savvy, our kids are tech savvy as well. So, giving them more awareness with making telefilms, giving them those knowledgeable cartoons, and also putting in the curriculum as well, of the school, which is very important for academics,
At least to a basic level. And I think these are the things that he addressed as well, at least to the extent of the roles of the different law enforcement agencies, so people have the record straight, what to expect, what not to expect.
Exactly. So these are very important things that should be added in the curriculum and the academics as well, merged together, so that a child in the school, either private or in the government school, knowing exactly what the laws are, knowing exactly what they should be doing, what is right or wrong. So they're all equally responsible with their actions,
Exactly.
If they see something going wrong in the family as well, so they're there with the voice, talking to their parents and having a healthy conversations, so that's the main role of an educationist.
And I think in this regard, movies, films, documentaries, even our Pakistani dramas, they can also have a very important, crucial role to play, because they do have that power to break or to, for that matter, change anybody's narrative, because we do see a lot of dramas being made on so many social issues, honor crimes, on child abuse, on acid attacks. So why not, issues of prisoners and how we can actually bring about constructive prison reform.
You see, this is all about educating a child about crime. So not to commit a crime, what's wrong, what's right, they should be knowing that from the school itself. So there again, in the social media, when you're talking with the dramas, when you're talking about these soaps as well, and they should have such documentaries made for our generation next.
Right. And I think in this regard, we must also, have more of such movies which actually promote them in a more positive, in a more strong, and of course in a more progressive light too, on which Ms. Wajia, I'll come to you. Wajia, I would want you to comment on the fact that when we talk about, the challenges that you come across, tell us about the challenges that you come across in a personal capacity, because a lot of times we see that inevitably people who are treating, those who are actually suffering from different psychological issues, they also have some kind of a mental burnout. So has that ever happened to you? And if it has, how do you cope with it?
Yes, it does happen to me and to all of the psychologists, because working inside the prison is is entirely different than working at a clinic or some other setup. In prison itself is a very stressful. Prison has a stressful environment. We have to deal with the people who are not who have diverse kind of issues. It is a restricted environment. We cannot even. I will just give you an example that I cannot move around at my workplace alone. Even around my own office. So there are restrictions for our own safety and protection, of course, but and also while dealing with such cases where a person is not only going through mental stress or psychological disturbance, also with that the person is still confined inside the prison. No matter what we are doing with them for the treatment, at the end of the day they cannot go outside, and we cannot suggest them to go outside, enjoy the nature, and do meet family, friends, and all that. They have to live there in that stressful environment.
I
So
think
that
that
is
makes
that.
your job more tough as well. And I think in this regard, maybe pulling people out of substance abuse and drug addiction, that would also, be very challenging.
Okay, talking about drug addiction, we have a major number of cases inside in prisons. We have are of drug addiction, drug related cases, 9B, 9C under sections. So with that, we have proper mechanism. There are also the rehabilitation centers are under construction in jails, which is a great initiative, I believe. With that, we have a proper procedure for that. When they come to the psychologist, if they are having withdrawal symptoms, we refer them to medical officer, and then we have multiple sessions with them, motivation interviewing, group sessions with the drug addicts. They are well taken care of.
Right, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Sarah, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, I think we must talk about the reform, the way forward, in which I understand that you have been working quite a lot more so when it comes to, of course, building capacity of all the relevant stakeholders. But overall, if you were to sum up this whole discussion of today, what would your recommendations be in terms of policy formulation, in terms of institutional strengthening, and of course, in terms of the capacity building that you're already doing?
Thank you. So, I think if we just go in order of importance,
Right.
based on the stuff that we've discussed today, which was an excellent discussion, by the way. This is one of the best I've been a part of.
Thank you.
I think number one would be, it's really important for our courts, our superior courts, to issue sentencing guidelines.
Right.
Concrete sentencing guidelines that can assist lower courts, magistrates courts in actually deciding to grant bail or not to grant bail, as we go on. That will help and have a direct impact on overcrowding in prison.
Right.
The second thing is, we urgently, if we're looking at prison reform, we need legal framework reform. The Pakistan prison rules, the Prisoners Act, have been around for nearly, over 70 years. Other provinces such as Sindh and KP have actually revised their rules. Punjab is the biggest province. It must revise its rules. It's got the most amount of prisoners, so that needs to happen.
Right.
Along with that, more provisions for probation and parole, so that vulnerable prisoners like women, like juvenile offenders, old prisoners, terminally ill prisoners, can be allowed, sustained release,
Right.
Probation and parole. We really do need, and this is generally in Pakistan at the federal and the provincial level, we need more mental health support and more
Right.
resources, federal and provincial resources, being dedicated to mental health
It's
support.
both under-resourced as well as understaffed. I think we need more psychologists
Absolutely,
that we do,
and
of
if
course.
you look at the figures released by the WHO and also our Planning Commission on the number of mental health professionals to the population, it's grossly uneven, and people need that support, because if you don't provide that early on, these people are going to end up in prison. Finally, just with our capacity building, we've been working, you asked earlier about the journey for Safia Banu. That began with the clients that we started representing, from the trial court to the high court to the Supreme Court, but it also began because we did years and years of training judicial officers, having seminars with superior court judges, from Sindh, Punjab, KP, over many years, and now, till we got Safia Banu. So it was about changing hearts and minds and stakeholders' opinions, training lawyers, training prosecutors, and now we've got the next level is trying to implement the recommendations of the Supreme Court. So we're working with the Sindh Prisons Authority and the Sindh Mental Health Authority to initiate trainings on training prison officials, police officials, even prison psychiatrists,
prison staff,
and prison staff and lawyers on mental health issues faced by them.
Which
and
is,
so we
I
hope
think,
to do
the
that.
pressing need of the hour, because I
Yes.
think we need to get our basics straight. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Sarah. Coming to, I think, overall, I think something which Sarah also mentioned, and I would want you to deliberate upon this further, that when we talk about the role of, prisons, the roles of sentencing in any criminal justice system, so to speak, do you not feel that for Pakistan at least it is time that we also, start prioritizing rehabilitation rather than just focusing on, punishing people?
So I think that is very important, because right now the jails, they actually contribute in breeding criminality. So people who visit jail, there's high likelihood that they are going to re-offend.
That's
So
exactly what I said in my introduction. Yes.
So and I think what we need to understand and emphasize that you cannot separate economy and economic and social class from the prison and this entire debate. So we need to focus that we need to make people productive members of society and equip them with tools that they once they go out of those prison walls, they are not forced to come back.
Right, Osama, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you. And coming towards the conclusion of the show, I think he has raised some very valid points on which I would want you to deliberate further too, that when we talk about this whole issue, of course, we can't see it in isolation. Now, education, of course, has a very important role to play, but so do parents. So how do you feel can better parenting at the end of the day help in reducing crime in any society?
Well, to be very honest with you, it's the basic role of a parent to give them the right environment. The main thing in the aspect which is leading to problematic situations for children all around the world, and especially in Pakistan, is the neglect. When parents start neglecting their kids.
Right.
Now this happens even when you are a richer parent or a poorer parent, so both sides, it's really happening. So in the poorer parents, what happens is they have financial issues and economical issues. So that's actually reflecting to this, kids, when you have rich parents, what's happening that they're too busy with their lifestyle.
Set of activities.
Yeah, they're so busy with their lifestyles, they actually don't know what their kids are doing, so there's no check and balance and insufficient parenting needs over there, So I'd just like to add in here that giving proper time, giving proper conversations, and building up a community starts from its home itself.
Right, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Wajiha, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, you must tell us about the most common myths that you come across as somebody working in the criminal justice system, more so about the prison system, about prisoners, even for that matter, people like yourself, and those myths which annoy you and those which you would want to actually debunk using today's platform.
So there are a lot of myths or misconceptions, I would say.
Right.
People think that prisoners are being neglected and there is a chaos kind of environment in prisons. Prison culture has evolved a lot, I believe. Now that one of our panelists was talking about parole system. Parole system is operational, and there are prisoners who are being released on parole. We are doing parole assessments as well. Prisoners have there is this myth that the meals inside the prison, they are not really not that we can eat that. Normal humans cannot eat that. I personally have tasted that food. It is just like normal khana, normal meal. And also about the facilities that are being provided to prisoners includes they do have geysers for winter season. They do have LEDs to watch TV. They do watch PTV as well, of course, and they do have access to medical help and also the psychological help. We do conduct multiple group sessions, and it's not, yes, overcrowding is one issue that is valid and that exists.
Your point is noted. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Osama. Thank you so much, Ms. Manal.
Welcome.
And thank you so much, Wajiha, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about prisons as they do exist in the Pakistani society. We spoke about the challenges which do come forward in the prison system, in the criminal justice system, so to speak. We spoke about the need to emphasize on rehabilitation of prisoners, and this is something that we need to focus on. We need to work on our policies. We need to actively work on, strengthening our institutions, and we also need to work in this regard on actually making a very positive effort on reintegrating prisoners back into the society, because because they very famously and rightly say when they say that a society is not known by the way it treats its highest, or for that matter its most affluent class. It is best known by the way it treats its lowest, or for that matter its more downtrodden segments of the society. On which note, thank you so much for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.